Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
What's up, everyone, and welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. It is your host, Nick Giordano. I am glad you've joined me today. Make sure that you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, PASreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. So this is take two of this episode, all right? I recorded the first episode, and it was going to be a fascinating episode about the national strategy for countering domestic terrorism and how the media wants to label Trump as a dictator. But an hour after I recorded, what happened? Well, I got the alert that President Trump ordered a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. So I'm going to release the national strategy episode next week, which I think is fitting because it will be July 4th week. So it certainly speaks to liberty and our rights and freedoms. Today, obviously, I'm going to focus on this because whether you agree with the strike or not, it was a brilliant operation, and no one should be surprised of President Trump's decision, especially if you're a regular listener of the P.A.S. Report podcast, because I've talked about this on several episodes. Back in April, I had on George Hill, former FBI supervisory intel analyst, and he stated that the whole signal chat scandal that broke out was all misdirection. It was to throw the American people, the media, and the Iranians off guard. And if you listened to Your Island with Tom Shalero on Friday, I said then how I believe President Trump made his decision, and I expected an attack to happen by Monday at the latest. Now, it turns out we were right here. And the planning for this operation was going on for months. It was months in the making, and the operational security was nothing short of remarkable. In a town where everything gets leaked like a sieve to the press, you got to credit the high-stakes mission without a single leak. This is almost unheard of in Washington, D.C., and it speaks to just how tightly this information was held. And there's little doubt that Iran's nuclear capabilities have been decimated. This strike didn't just set them back. It may have erased decades of progress in a single night. Their nuclear program may be beyond repair. They may have to start all over for the most part. President Trump came out Saturday night to make a statement. He made the announcement to tell the American people what had happened. And to be honest, I thought he should have better explained why the Iranian nuclear program is a threat to the United States, why the strike was necessary. And he should have spoken directly to the Iranian people about how their government has once again put their own survival above the well-being of their people, why their government has provoked this conflict, why their government has wasted resources, and why their government has isolated Iran from the rest of the world. We basically told the mullahs that they don't have the cards. And think about how we got here, because it really is amazing. This is an extraordinary moment in history that we're living through, because this moment began on October 7th when Hamas conducted the terror attacks on Israel. First of all, there was no doubt, and I said it then, that Hamas was trained by the IRGC to do that operation. Little doubt about that. Since then, what have we seen? Well, Israel methodically degraded Hamas and their capabilities. They then methodically degraded Hezbollah's leadership and their capabilities. It eliminated a number of Hezbollah members, and it destroyed the organization's will to fight. Then they took out, about 8 months ago, they took out the Iranian air defense capabilities. 2 months ago, we began to degrade the Houthis' capabilities, all the Iranian proxies. And Israel and the United States took out many of the key leaders within the Houthi organization. 2 weeks ago, Israel starts the operation. They launch a full-scale campaign against other Iranian air defense systems, as well as key Iranian leadership in the intelligence and military units. 14 out of 15 of their top nuclear scientists getting assassinated. And you have to wonder if the 15th nuclear scientist is in hiding, or did the 15th nuclear scientist tell the Israelis where the other 14 were? But this created a unique opportunity as Iran is at its weakest point than it's ever been in since the 1979 Islamic Revolution. The Ayatollah is now isolated. His proxies do not have the will to fight. And this was the best opportunity that we would get to destroy the Iranian nuclear program. And notice how quiet other Middle Eastern countries are. Countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Syria, nothing from Russia and China. Iran is isolated. With all that being said, though, there is a profound question that we have to ask. What comes next? Was this just a one-off strike? Will officials try and pressure President Trump to seek regime change in Iran, embark on another stupid, endless endeavor of nation building? Will Iran come to the table realizing that their back is against the wall, begin to negotiate surrender? Will the Iranians retaliate with whatever little capabilities they have left? Will the Iranian people rise up and oust the mullahs from power? There are so many questions and so little answers. Obviously, the best case scenario would be for the Ayatollah to realize that he and his administration's back is against the wall, that they're on the brink of collapse, that they don't have the cards, and so they come to the negotiating table. But here at the P.A.S. report, I don't focus on how I hope things turn out. I don't focus on the best case scenarios. That's how our foreign policy became a mess in the first place. Our entire foreign policy apparatus here in the United States for decades, has operated on best case scenarios. And if you notice, it has not worked out too well for us here in the United States. I believe it's important that we examine all scenarios, and we always should be planning for the worst. Iran's capabilities have been severely degraded. Their proxies have been neutered. However, this doesn't mean that Iran cannot launch any strikes. And obviously, our military bases in the region, our embassies throughout the world, they're all at risk. They're on high alerts. But I'm not too concerned about that. I do believe that the security within the embassies is strong. I believe that we know the targets, military bases in the region, and so we could move troops around. We could strengthen the defenses of these bases. And given what we've seen in this mission, obviously, the Trump administration has planned for retaliatory strikes by Iran on our military bases. However, this does not mean that I don't have any concerns. I do have some concerns, and those concerns are twofold. First is the Strait of Hormuz. This is a key waterway where 30% of the world's oil supply comes from. If Iran attempts to close the strait, it could wreak havoc on the world's oil supplies, and we could see a dramatic increase in the price of oil. It's not that we'd openly allow Iran to close the straits. The Iranian Navy cannot come close to going toe-to-toe with our Navy, but they can cause disruptions, as oil isn't going to flow from an area if there's conflict, if there's constant threats. You're not going to see the oil barges flow. And I don't anticipate any long-term closures of the strait, but any disruption is going to send oil prices skyrocketing. And this could lead to inflation. It could stunt economic growth. It does pose a risk to Trump's entire economic plan. Another concern is something that I brought up several times before on this podcast. We know that Iranian agents, both military and intelligence agents, are here in the United States, and so are their proxies. And they didn't come here to seek asylum, right? They didn't come here to live the American dream. They didn't come here for peaceful purposes. They came here to scout out targets and plot attacks. They came here to gather intelligence, and they came here to potentially conduct operations in case there is a war. So some of them have been here for decades. Others came over in the last 4 years under the Biden administration's open border policies. In fact, over 3,000 Iranians have come across our southern border, and the intelligence community believes that a few hundred of them are part of the Iranian regime. You had Tom Homan come out on Sunday saying, yes, there are Iranians here. Under the Biden administration, you had millions of people pouring across the border. And so we don't know where a lot of them are. We can't track them. And that does pose a direct risk to us here at home. That is a threat. I'm not saying that attacks here on the homeland are imminent. I'm not saying we're going to start seeing constant terror attacks at the hands of Iranian agents, but we need to prepare ourselves for any such attacks, both physically and mentally. We have to wait and see. Is the Ayatollah going to greenlight any of these attacks? And even if the Ayatollah does greenlight the attacks, those with hostile intent in the United States, do they see that maybe the writing's on the wall? that the Ayatollah's days are going to be numbered, and therefore they're going to disregard any orders trying to blend into the background for their own survival. Understand, survival is an important concept. It could go either way at this point. Only time is going to tell. But we have to understand that the threat does exist, and we have to be prepared that these attacks may happen. We have to be realistic about that. Then there's the question of a broader military campaign on the part of the United States. Before I get into that, I briefly want to discuss whether the president has the constitutional authority to launch these strikes on Iran in the first place, whether he had the authority to preemptively launch strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, because you already have some Democrats screaming that the president should be impeached for this, that he needs to be removed from office, he's unhinged. I mean, basically, with every issue, they say he should be impeached. If Democrats had their way, President Trump would have been impeached about 104 times at this point. You have some Republicans saying that what President Trump did is unconstitutional. Then you have those that say that the president only has to seek congressional approval if the president authorizes boots on the ground, which is just dumb, to be honest with you. A military operation is a military operation. It doesn't matter if there's boots on the ground or it's an air campaign. It's still a military operation. In any event, in my opinion, like almost every single one of his predecessors, the president is easily going to justify these strikes under the War Powers Act. He's going to argue that Iran's nuclear program posed an imminent threat to the United States, and therefore he had to take action. It's also important to remember that we're talking about Iran here. This has been a hostile regime for over 40 years. It's responsible for killing thousands of Americans, conducting terror attacks on Americans, from the Marines' barrack bombings to the Kobar Towers to the soldiers on the battlefield of Iraq. If we look at the amount of Americans Iran has killed, it's actually far more than Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So we do need to acknowledge that. At the same time, I do acknowledge how much the Iranian nuclear facilities posed as a threat can be debated. We know that, at least we suspect, Iran doesn't have any nuclear weapons, and I think that's a safe bet. Otherwise, we probably would have seen one go off at this point. But the fact is that Iran did have enough nuclear material to make several nuclear bombs if they decided to go that. We also have to be honest when it comes to people saying whether or not, asking the question whether or not Trump had the authority to do this. Congress has allowed presidents to have wide latitude when it comes to military strikes over the last dozen or so administrations. I mean, how many strikes have previous presidents ordered without any congressional approval? And there was never any punishments. There was no repercussions, no accountability. In fact, Congress would give their blessing, just maybe not through an authorization to use force, and certainly not through a declaration of war. So President Trump didn't do anything that previous presidents haven't already done. We also have to recognize that if Congress was notified, there is nearly 100% certainty that the operation would have been leaked to the press, that it would have put our troops in our nation at risk. We also have to acknowledge that the founding fathers, I'm a big founding fathers guy. I'm a big constitutionalist. I love American history, and I think that the founding fathers were brilliant in the system they set up. The system's flawed. It's not a perfect system, but it is the best system that has been created, the best governing structure that has been created. And the founding fathers always believed in the idea of limited government, checks and balances, separation of powers. They never intended for a War Powers Act. They believed that any military campaign, any military action should be determined by the many as opposed to the few. And while they empowered the president to be the commander-in-chief, they were weary of one person making the decision of whether or not America goes to war. I do believe that if there is any future military activity in Iran, if there's a widening of this conflict, I do believe that the president must seek congressional approval. And I know that may sound a little hypocritical of me, that I'm saying that the president could justify the strikes on the nuclear facilities under the War Powers Act, but at the same time, as this war may widen, that he needs to seek congressional approval. I get that. But understand, the warmongers, the neocons, they're out in full force right now. They're looking for a broader military campaign against the Iranian government, and some are even going so far as to push this idea of regime change that has failed so many times in our past and has actually made things worse. This is such an important episode because the drumbeat for war is growing louder and louder. Ever since President Trump ordered the strikes on the Iranian nuclear facilities, there are many here in America that are pushing for a much wider campaign, that are calling for regime change. And listening to some of the talking heads in the media, the politicians, it just becomes nauseating. Many of these same fools are the ones responsible for the forever wars that have cost us trillions of dollars in debt, thousands of soldiers coming back to the United States in flag-draped coffins, tens of thousands of soldiers coming home with life-altering injuries, their lives forever changed. And not only that, but these campaigns have severely weakened the United States. We've lost an enormous amount of power and influence throughout the world, and it's only served to embolden our adversaries. Yet the rhetoric that I have been hearing since Saturday night is so irresponsible. And it's not just irresponsible, it's also dangerous. Have we learned nothing over the last few decades? The good news is I don't believe that President Trump will fall for the bullshit. I think he has been methodical in his approach, and he is keenly aware that a wider campaign does not serve our purpose, that it doesn't serve in the interests of the United States. Because at the end of the day, that's the most important question. Not what's in the interests of the Middle East, not what's in the interests of the Iranian government and the Iranian people, not what's in the interest of Israel, but what's in the interest of the United States. And so a wider campaign does not serve that purpose. He's also aware that there's internal conflicts going on with his supporters, the people that voted for him. Trump campaigned against getting involved in endless wars. He knows the cost. And I believe he and many in his administration are well aware of the complexities with Iranian geography. It's a large country. It's a very difficult terrain. And if we did expand this campaign, we did end up putting boots on the ground. You know, part of the reason that Iraq and Afghanistan became a major problem was because we didn't use overwhelming and decisive force. We used skeletal forces to go in. We sent in, take Iraq, for example. I don't know how many people live in Iraq, 45, 50, 60 million people. And we sent in about 110,000 troops. We scaled up during the surge to 125,000 troops. But a big part of the problem is that we couldn't secure the entire country immediately. And so we were playing whack-a-mole with an insurgency. And the reason that the battle plan was drawn up like that is because Americans still suffer from the Vietnam syndrome. So the war planners, they approach battle plans by how many casualties will the American people accept. When you look at it, Colin Powell argued that if you're going to do something, you do it right. And if you break it, you own it. So if you're going to go into Iraq, send in 500,000 troops, take over the entire country, pacify it, get out. But that's not what happens. Time and time again, we send in small skeletal forces, and it makes our job much more difficult. President Trump does not want to get us involved in another quagmire, and he certainly doesn't believe in the idea of nation building. But mission creep is a real thing, and mission creep has been a big problem with our foreign policy for quite some time. I mean, just think back to Afghanistan. Initially, it was about taking out al-Qaeda and removing the Taliban from power. Then it morphed into rebuilding the country, and it morphed into turning Afghanistan into a vibrant and thriving democracy. No one could really tell you what that even means or what it actually looks like, hence a 20-year war that ends in catastrophic failure. See, missions should always be guided by smart objectives that are simple, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. Think back to the first Persian Gulf War. Repel Saddam's forces from Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. Simple objective. It can also be measured, as we could see on the battlefield, right? We advance, we push forward, and Saddam's forces pull back. It's certainly attainable and realistic, as we are the more dominant and superior military. And it was obviously timely, only taking us about a month and a half to declare mission accomplished. Now, juxtapose that with Afghanistan and the second Iraq war, and you see the difference. If we look at President Trump's strikes over the weekend, again, we see smart objectives. While the overall operation was complex, the goal was simple: destroy Iran's nuclear program and capabilities. It was measurable. We're going to find out through damage assessments that are going to be conducted over the coming days between our satellite imagery, our sources on the ground, the Israeli Mossad getting information for us, going to these sites. We're going to get an idea of what is the damage to Iran's nuclear program. How far did we set them back? And are these facilities now unoperable, that they are so far damaged that they can never be restored or repaired? We're going to find that out. So it is measurable. The objectives, obviously attainable and realistic, and they were certainly timely. It only took a few hours to do this operation. And with that being said, the Ayatollah is now in a much weakened position, and his administration may be on the brink of collapse. And this is where the danger lies, because this is why many of the hawks want to conduct regime change. The Lindsey Grahams of the world. They're calling for more strikes to take out Iranian infrastructure, to decapitate the Iranian government economically, and they're even calling to target the oil fields. Now, if you listen to last week's episode with Lieutenant Colonel Tony Schaefer, he explicitly stated, no, don't do that. You don't want to destroy those oil fields. This would be a disaster. This is what leads to mission creep, because it shows you just how dumb these people are. If we listen to them, they all but guarantee that Iran becomes a failed state, a state of poverty, despair, a state of violence. And we know that whenever there's that vacuum, terrorism is right behind it. Do we want to see another failed state in the Middle East? Do we want to see another Middle Eastern country racked with violence that begins to bleed out into other countries? You want to take out the Iranian oil fields. Well, those oil fields are what can help them actually have money and thrive once the Ayatollah is gone. But yet you have people like Senator Tom Cotton calling for those oil fields to be blown up. It's completely ludicrous. And, I like Tom Cotton. It's not like a Lindsey Graham to me. But at the same time, we need to be smart in our endeavors. We need to pick and choose. So we need to walk a really fine line. And listen, is the Ayatollah weakened at this point? Sure. There's zero doubt about that. Is the Ayatollah isolated? Absolutely. Just the other day, the Ayatollah released a list of successes. How pissed do you think the successes are? Like, don't put my name on that list. I don't want to be a target next. But is the Ayatollah as weak as some are saying? Has he really lost his grip on power? And I think that's a really important question to ask, because many are saying that the Ayatollah has lost all power. It's only a matter of time before he and his regime are collapsed, they're ousted. But is that true? And for this, we really need to look back. I want you to think about the downfall of Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi. When the Arab Spring broke out and civil war erupted in Libya, Muammar Gaddafi chose to cling to power and fight it out. To him, life wasn't worth living without power. He didn't take the Hosni Mubarak route and step down. Instead, he unleashed a brutal campaign. And what did we see as a result? Well, we saw high-level defections throughout the Gaddafi government. Several members of Gaddafi's own administration, his own inner circle, came out repudiating him, renouncing his leadership in the administration. We saw Libyan ambassadors and diplomats throughout the world do the same thing, and they sought safe haven in the host countries they were in. We saw large-scale military defections. We saw fighter pilots land their fighter jets in foreign countries as they were unwilling to fight for the administration. It was clear. Gaddafi was done. He didn't have the support or power of the people. Now, are we seeing any of that happening now in Iran? Has there been a single high-level defection within the Ayatollah's inner circle, within the Iranian government, within the Iranian military, within the Iranian diplomatic corps? Because I haven't seen any. And that signals to me that while the Ayatollah and his power have been weakened, he still has a pretty firm grip on that country. And it's not up to the United States or Israel or any other country to decide what should happen to Iranian leadership. If there is going to be regime change, it has to be organic. It has to come from the Iranian people. It is up to the people of Iran to decide their future. And just look at what the Declaration of our Independence says. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter and abolish it and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. That governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. That accordingly, all of the experience had shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations pursuing invariably the same object evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism, it is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. It is the Iranian people that must decide what their future security will be. And I've studied Iran for decades. In fact, I wrote my master's thesis on Iran, and this was 20 years ago, literally 20 years ago, where I wrote in that thesis that all the ingredients for a new revolution existed, that Iran was primed for an Iranian revolution, except for one key ingredient that's been missing, that's always been missing. And that's a central opposition figure that the people can rally behind. 20 years later, since I wrote that thesis, they still don't have that central figure yet. And again, this is where we see the idiocy of our politicians, of our policymakers, of the foreign policy pundits out there. Some are already meeting with Reza Pahlavi as if he's going to be installed as the next leader of Iran. This is the son of the Shah. The Shah's regime, understand history, the Shah's regime was brutal. That is what led to the 1979 Islamic Revolution and the rise of Ayatollah Khomeini. I'm not sure that's the central figure you want to throw your support behind. And it's not that Reza Pahlavi is a bad guy. He's someone that's westernized, he Western education, has lived in a free society. But given his father's history, do you think that Iranians may be a little suspicious? I don't think the Iranians want to make the same mistake they did in 1979, basically trading one brutal dictatorship for another. And I'm not saying that Reza Pahlavi would be a dictator. He may be a great transition leader. But he's been in exile for over 40 years. Does he really have the credibility amongst ordinary Iranians that have been living in Iran? So you already see us backing certain horses, and it may not work out that way. We have to be really careful as to our next move. And the Iranian government has to be really careful as to their next move. But the talk about regime change, the talk about starting to go after Iranian infrastructure, blowing up their oil fields, again, this is irresponsible. This is what gets us into the nation-building framework that always backfires on us, okay? We were successful in World War II with the Marshall Plan for a reason. But that doesn't mean that same model can be exported. It shows that it can't be exported in certain parts of the world. Didn't work in Iraq, didn't work in Afghanistan, it won't work in Iran. President Trump needs to remain focused on the actual mission. You destroyed the Iranian nuclear program. You have isolated Iran. It's time to get Iran to the table. If Iran does attack the United States, we do have a right and we must defend ourselves. There's no doubt about that. At the same time, an all-out war with Iran and a regime change war, a nation-building war, is a losing proposition. So it's going to be critical to watch what happens over the course of the next couple of weeks. It's going to be important that President Trump resists the temptation to take out the Iranian government. It's important that he boxes out those voices that are encouraging him to get full-scale involved in this war. We did our job. We did it well. And now it's time to go the diplomatic route. Try and solve this problem. If Iran's nuclear program is destroyed, if their proxies have been decimated, and the Iranian military has been decimated, they're marginalized. It won't just take them years to rebuild. It will take them decades to rebuild. Understand what's at stake over in Iran and try and bring Iran back into the community of nations. Now, if you found the content of this episode informative, please take 5 seconds, write the P.A.S. report a good review on any podcast platform that allows it, especially Apple Podcasts, because that's where the major draw is for discoverability. And share this episode. Share it with your family and friends so they know what's going on out there. Remember, just because something is happening thousands of miles away, it doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact directly here in the United States. What happens over there always impacts us over here. So make sure people are paying attention. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'll be back on Wednesday with another great episode of the P.A.S. Report Podcast.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com. And follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.